Welcome to Lead the Ask, the podcast where fundraising gets easier when leadership gets clearer. I'm Holly Cubia, fundraiser, consultant, nonprofit leader, and someone who has spent more than 2 decades helping organizations raise money, about $100 million to be exact, build relationships, and create impact, most importantly. Every week, we'll talk about fundraising, leadership, donor relationships, board engagement, communications, and the mindset shifts that help organizations move from uncertainty to confidence. Whether you're an executive director, a development professional, board member, community leader, you're in the right place. So let's get started. Today, we are talking about something every nonprofit leader should be paying attention to: the current state of giving in America and what it means for your organization as you lead into the new fiscal year. It can vary, we all know, but oftentimes there's a good chunk of you that are now thinking about your fundraising plan for the coming year, 2026 into 2027. Well, I have some good news. Americans gave nearly $600 billion to charity last year. The bad news? Most nonprofits are still chasing money in all the wrong places. So that's what we're going to dive into. We're going to dive into some of those numbers and how the big picture reflects into our smaller plans for our organization and how we can think about the trends and the work that we're doing to make the best use of our time. So let's take a look at those big numbers, okay? According to the latest Giving USA report, Americans gave approximately $592.5 billion with a B in 2024. It's quite a bit of money, folks. And that total giving increased 6.3% from the prior year, okay? And that's been adjusted for inflation. Now, again, we're looking at 2024 numbers, but this is still new data, right? It's still relevant. Yes, a lot of things have happened in 2026. We're starting to see some different trends, but this is really important information. Individual giving increased about 8.2%. Foundation giving was well over $100 billion, and corporate giving reached a big high of $44 billion. So how does all this hammer home? Well, no surprise, individuals still drive philanthropy. Individuals account for roughly 2/3 of all charitable giving. 2/3, 66%. Now coming behind, but greatly behind, foundations, 19%, corporations, 7%, and bequests, 8%. Big difference, right? This tells us quite a bit, okay, in terms of how we spend our time. So how do most nonprofits spend their time? Well, recently, in talking to a couple cohorts that I'm working with, smaller nonprofits, they're asking me about grants and sponsorships and corporate gifts. These are all wonderful pursuits and important. Yet, nearly 2/3 of all giving still come from people, from individuals who believe in the mission and believe in the momentum of that small nonprofit. So where should we spend the majority of our time? Probably at least 2/3 of it trying to solicit individuals for our annual gifts, for our leadership gifts, for our major gifts, whatever we call them. That is really, really important. And that's classic Lead the Ask material that I teach in my conversations and workshops with small nonprofits as I guide them into best practices and how to best align their fundraising so that it produces the best outcomes for them. All right, let's talk about the trends a little more and the whys. So wealth is concentrating, folks. That is the trend that we have to discuss. So what is happening there? While total giving is increasing, the number of donors has been declining for years, okay? So what that means is we're getting bigger gifts from fewer donors, And we have a higher concentration among those high capacity donors to do more. It's that top 10% of the wealthy individuals that are really leading fundraising and giving and philanthropy at a whole new level. And that is what is happening in America. So what does this mean for us in the day-to-day process? You cannot build a sustainable fundraising operation on events alone. I'll say it again for the people in the background. You cannot build a sustainable fundraising operation on events alone. Events are important. Please hear me out. Events serve their purpose. Events can raise money, but they are not the lion's share of our work when it comes to fundraising. We need to focus and double down on relationship fundraising. Stewardship, very, very important in terms of donor retention and getting people to give year after year, give more, and leading them into larger gift conversations where they can make a larger impact. And this ties directly to our pipeline development. So pipeline development is really understanding how your donors move through the life of your organization within a year, within their own time frame, what you can count on in the upcoming year, how to project what you're going to do in fundraising, how to develop your fundraising plan, and you kind of keep tabs on where donors are. Now, typically, your pipeline, we can talk about it, at a macro level, which you have your major gifts, your leadership gifts, and your annual gifts, right? The smaller gifts, some of which hopefully lead into leadership gifts, which some of which hopefully lead into major gifts, which is why giving year after year, stewardship, asking is all very important to our pipeline, okay? Trend number 2 that we're seeing, donors want impact more than ever before. I know they certainly have always wanted that, but this is increasing. So today's donors are increasingly asking, what changed? What did my gift accomplish? What problem did I help solve? They are less interested in your organizational needs. Unfortunately, I know that's a tough one, right? Because we need to keep everything operating. We need to meet payroll. We need to pay for all of these different things that are in our budget. But they don't necessarily want to hear about that, okay? They don't necessarily want to hear about our internal struggles. And they are less interested about our budget gaps. Not the best news, but what is good is that we get to focus on all the positive. The mission of the organization, that's what they're interested in. That's what they're falling in love with. Of course, that is not a surprise. So we don't get to wallow in all our challenges behind the scenes. For donors, they want to see the vision. They want to see how we're moving. They want to see how we're solving problems and what we've done so far. So that's a great opportunity to stay positive. They're more interested in those outcomes. And they probably want to give you a little advice sometimes. So let's stop reporting the activity of the organization and let's start reporting on the impact of our organization. I think that's a really positive one and an easy one for us to focus on all the wonderful aspects of our nonprofit. All right, trend number 3, foundation giving is strong, but it's competitive. It's not easy, okay? So foundation giving exceeded $109 billion. Again, that's significant, all right? So here is what most organizations miss with this. Foundations often fund organizations they already know, okay? So you're working on that big grant that's taking you hours and hours and hours. And while that is lovely, it is your first round and likely you will not be awarded. That is a, hey, here's who we are, nice to meet you, introduction, which you hopefully get feedback on or get to know someone in the organization and get some outreach so that you can build a relationship, okay? The strongest grant strategy is often relationship first, engagement, proposal. No surprise here. It is the same as developing relationships with individuals because, no surprise, we are engaging with people, humans. This is all about humans making decisions behind the scenes. All right. So this is not rocket science. I think there can be a lot of strategy that we all use, which is lovely. But if we don't have that relationship and that engagement before that proposal or that grant submission, it's a hope and a prayer, right? It is likely a different type of introduction where you have to go with the proposal first and then try to find the relationship and the engagement. So you're doing a lot of work on the front end to maybe perhaps catch someone's eye. Why not build that relationship first? Try to make those introductions first. Try to have some engagement, create some momentum before you submit. That's what I would propose. And that is certainly a tactic that I have used successfully in getting multi-million-dollar proposals out the door to foundations that we cultivate, we invite, we give tours, something of that nature. Okay, so this is an opportunity to connect grant seeking back to relationship building. They are truly one and of the same. So let's not be deceived in this. Let us not try to just hunker down and write a bunch of proposals to grants that are going nowhere fast. I'm not saying don't do it. Be strategic, be thoughtful, seek the relationship and the engagement with individuals that are decision makers first. That is your best use of time. Now, as we enter trend 4, we're talking about corporate giving. Corporate giving gets too much attention, all right? That's what the trend number 4 is. Corporate giving grew sustainably in 2024. However, corporations still represent only about 7% of total charitable giving, all right? So, yes, can our local small businesses make gifts? Sure they can. Can they be involved? Sure they can. Are they members of our community and individual donors also? Yes. Yes, they are. This is a part of our strategy, but I don't think we should lean too heavily on corporate giving. It is a piece of the pie, but if we put it all on sponsorship and corporate giving and bet, 25% of our fundraising revenues coming in that way, is it possible? Sure. Is it sustainable? Probably not. Where is the best use of our time? Individuals, where 2/3 of the overall giving in America comes from instead of 7%. Is there a strategy that can be helpful and useful and significant here? Absolutely. Certainly our friends in the chamber world do this very well, and it is their lifeblood, of course. But for nonprofits purely, 501c3 specifically, this is probably not the best use of our time. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be strategic, be thoughtful, and yes, baby steps into this, but don't believe that this is going to be the lion's share of your fundraising, because it's not. Because every other nonprofit in town is going after the same 20 to 30 small businesses that they think can save the day. All right. And sure, there can be alignment in mission and purpose, and there can be significant giving here. I'm trying to be realistic in corporate giving. I think corporate giving is emphasized too much in our small nonprofit world. I think we need to pull back a bit. Yes, develop something and have a good program in place, but it is not your bread and butter for your fundraising revenue for the year. Can big gifts happen? Certainly corporate gifts can happen, but I would also bet to say that that stemmed from a personal relationship, from an individual who made the decision on the corporate side, and from the individual who decided to give perhaps through their business or perhaps through corporate giving. Again, individuals, relationships are always going to win out. Trend number 5, planned giving is about to matter a heck of a lot more, all right? America is in the middle of the largest wealth transfer in history. Trillions of dollars are moving from one generation, the baby boomers, of course, to the next over the coming decades. So a lot of movement here, a lot of significance, and I think planned giving is a really important piece of the puzzle that we need to give some time and attention to. Again, not lion's share, but being really thoughtful here. A lot of nonprofits do not have any planned giving program at all. Okay. And I think that really depends on a few factors. The nature of the nonprofit, how long the nonprofit's been around. If you just started a nonprofit 3 years ago and you're considering planned giving, I would say longevity would be a little more important before I get to planned giving. Many nonprofits do not have any type of legacy society. Another word for planned giving, a gentle approach, leaving your legacy as a human, as a contributor in your community, your state, or country, right? There's often no bequest language that we recommend. I've run into this a lot. There's no program. They don't really know how to set that up. It's really not that difficult. Some simple language you can get from an attorney that works with your nonprofit. And there are certainly no conversations about estate gifts. And these can be tricky conversations. So I understand why a lot of nonprofits don't have this in place. This is delicate language. If they're not building relationships and they're not making individual asks, there's a really good reason why they don't have a planned giving program. Because if we can't do that work well and first and do it repeatedly and consistently, then we're probably not ready for a planned giving program. Yet, bequests still account for tens of billions annually. So there are some statistics around this. If your organization is able, after some really great conversation, to be part of an estate gift, to be the recipient of a legacy gift, and written into an estate plan or 401k recipient, whatever the case may be, you likely will not be removed. Most likely, once you are included in the estate gift, you are included in the bequest, you will remain there. Your organization will remain there. And you have to steward that and be really thoughtful about that work. And that can happen at any age. I think we wait often for folks in their 60s or 70s or perhaps later to make these decisions. And oftentimes it can be much earlier. So this is a huge opportunity that I think some organizations that have been around 5 to 10 years can begin to think about and can begin to put some very simple mechanisms in place to begin having these conversations, or at least making it available to donors and sending out some informational pieces about how to make an estate gift with your organization and what that means and what it could look like. We've reviewed where we are with the state of affairs and philanthropy in America, and I think we're in a pretty solid place. Certainly, a lot of things have changed in 2026, and we're starting to see perhaps some downward trends, especially with the gas pumps and what's happening there at this moment. And recording this in June of 2026. I want to bring this all home and bring it all together. The leadership takeaway from this, the lesson from all the data, is not go find more donors. That's never the answer. All right. The lesson is let's focus on building these three things. A clear donor pipeline. I don't care if it only has 5 people in it. Building a donor pipeline can be highly sophisticated. If you don't have one and you don't even know what I'm talking about, let's start small. Let's start with those top donors that we know and love, and that know and love us, most importantly. I also want you to focus on a board and developing a board. Yes, you have to lead your board. We need them to work for us in the right way. We need them to open doors and make warm introductions so that we can begin to build relationships and have substantial conversations that lead towards gifts down the road. And third thing I want you to focus on from all of this is a stewardship system that retains donors. So important. So, donor pipeline, board that open doors, stewardship system. We will dive into each of these areas a little bit more and how we do this work. But these 3 things are so important as you consider your fundraising plan, because giving is growing. And the question isn't whether money exists. The question is whether your organization is positioned to receive it. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining me for this episode of Lead the Ask. If today's conversation challenged your thinking or gave you a practical next step, I'd love to have you share that with a colleague or a board member, executive director, or perhaps a fellow fundraiser. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, follow, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. This is Lead the Ask. It helps more nonprofit leaders find these conversations and strengthen our growing community. Remember this. Fundraising gets easier when leadership gets clearer. Lead the vision, lead the conversation, lead the ask. I'll see you next time.